Hi guys, Barbara here, friends of the Cabildo tour guide. But as of lately, I haven't been able to go out and do very many of my tours. So, like a lot of you guys, I've been spending a lot of time at home. And as you can see, I'm in my kitchen today. I have been doing a lot more cooking lately. But that's been presented with its own set of challenges, right? We all know the state of our grocery stores today. We're met with barren shelves, no chicken, no meat, no eggs, no bread, and of course, none of that all-elusive toilet paper. Last week I go to the store and I set out to make a pot of chicken and andouille gumbo. So I get to the store and of course there's no chicken. But what they did have was frozen turkeys. So I said, well, poultry's poultry, and beggars can't be choosy. So I threw that in the basket and said, fine, let's go see now if they have some andouille. So I head over to the meat department and literally got the last of the 2 packs of andouille on the shelf. Said, okay, good so far. Threw that in the basket. Let's go over to produce and let's see if they have the makings of the Holy Trinity. Celery, check. Bell pepper, check. Yellow onions? No, the bin was empty. What am I going to do? I need onions. But they did have a couple of Vidalia onions. So I said, okay, Vidalia onions are going to be a little bit sweeter than a yellow onion, but we'll try that. Throw that in the basket. Let's go. So I got home, and I made my gumbo, and I have to say that it ended up being quite tasty. But all this cooking I've been doing lately has got me to thinking a lot about the history of food in New Orleans. And how did it come to be that we eat some of the foods that we eat here? And what did our ancestors do when they didn't have the ingredients that they needed to make a dish that they wanted to make? Well, do you know that the first act of civil disobedience in North America was not about taxation without representation or civil liberties? It was all about food, and it was held right here in New Orleans. It was called the Pan Revolt of 1720. And as the story goes, the French women who were living here in the city were upset that they didn't have the ingredients and the foodstuffs that they were accustomed to back in France, and they couldn't make the dishes that they were accustomed to making. So they gathered one day in mass, and they armed themselves with frying pans and pots and ladles and spoons, and they marched down the streets of New Orleans banging their pots, headed toward Governor Bienville's house. And when they got there, they gave him an earful. They complained about the lack of ingredients, and they demanded that he rectify the situation immediately. Well, his housekeeper, Madame Langlois, hears the ruckus from the back of the house. She comes to the front door. She listens to the ladies' complaints, and then she promptly ushers them back to her kitchen. And she demonstrates for them how they could substitute the usage of local ingredients for those ingredients that they didn't have and still end up with a very tasty, pleasing dish. So Creole cooking is based a lot on this rule of substitution. Did you know that the original praline that was made in France was made with almonds, not with pecans? The Ursuline nuns are credited with bringing the art of praline making to the city. But when they got here, they were met with a dilemma. There's no almonds in South Louisiana, but what do we have here in abundance? Pecan trees. And pecans were falling off the trees, and the nuns would go out and gather them up in bushels and bring them back to the convent. And they would make their pralines with pecans. So thus was born the pecan praline, which today is still a New Orleans confectionery staple. Jambalaya. Jambalaya is thought to be the Spanish immigrants' attempt at making their rice dish called paella. Paella Valenciana is considered to be the original recipe, and it consisted of chicken and duck and rabbit and saffron, which gives it that yellow coloring. Now, the Creoles tried to make paella. There's no saffron in Louisiana, so they substituted tomatoes, these rich, beautiful red Creole tomatoes that would grow so well here because of the minerality in the soil. And they used what was in abundance. Now, being a town surrounded by waterways, what is more abundant than seafood? So they started to put seafood, primarily shrimp, into their rice dish. And that is the makings of what today we call a Creole or a red jambalaya. Now, the Cajuns came down in the mid 1760s from Nova Scotia. Back then it was called Acadia. And they didn't settle primarily in the New Orleans area. They settled about 100 miles west of here in what we call Acadiana. And they tried to make paella, but they're not surrounded by water. They don't have seafood at their beck and call the way that the Creoles did. But the Cajuns were avid hunters and trappers, so a lot of their foods have meat and poultry and sausage. And the Cajuns also like pepper and spice, cayenne pepper. So they made their jambalaya utilizing those ingredients, and that's what we refer to as a brown jambalaya. So these are just a couple of examples of how foods have evolved in New Orleans over time, and at how they utilize this concept of substitution. So I think I'm going to go back, and I'm going to have a cup of my turkey gumbo, and I'm going to sit down and ponder on what might be a good substitute for toilet paper.